Okay, I'm Kathy Kress, and I'm back again with my YouTube channel, Geriatric Care 1, and we're doing caregiver assessment. So, what triggers a caregiver assessment? The first thing is an intake. You do an intake on the care receiver, who's the older person, and if you find that there's burnout on the part of the caregiver, you can suggest a caregiver assessment. Another trigger is hospitalization, because when the care receiver comes home from the hospital, all of the care is going to change. And can the caregiver really do that? If they have macular degeneration and now they have to give needles, can they do that? If they have to turn the care receiver, and they're 80 themselves, can they do that? And that triggers a caregiver assessment. And what are the outcomes of caregivers assessments? And that's a big word that we use in social sciences. Well, caregivers learn to make informed decisions. That's an outcome of this assessment, because Mrs. Handy learned that she could use her family to help. Duh! But, when you're the oldest daughter, you think that you never ask your family to help. And so she changed. She metamorphized. Care managers, the outcome is you get a care plan. For the caregiver, they find out there's a link to the community, because Mrs. Handy learned to be in a caregiver support group. She learned to go on the web and find out about her own health problems as a result of caregiving, and her father's health problems. The outcome out of assessment essentially is a care plan, which is how you solve the problems. So in the health interventions, Mrs. Handy goes to the doctor because she realizes, she's losing weight and she's incredibly anxious. She needs some anxiety relief. And so the outcome in this one, in Mrs. Handy's case, is she did not place her dad. Out of all of this, she did not place her dad, because there was a reduction in the family crisis. And Mrs. Handy's husband and children were suffering out of her care for her father and no sleep, and so therefore her marriage got back intact. Her child stopped having accidents at preschool, so he didn't get kicked out. The older child started to do better in 8th grade or 7th grade. And so those outcomes were great. So it's not just the outcome for the care provider, it's the outcome for the husband, the 3-year-old, the 9-year-old, and her job didn't fire her because she got to keep her job because she wasn't late anymore. And so that was a great outcome for her. And outcomes out of a caregiver assessment is the caregiver gets training. And so, this geriatric care manager was training Mrs. Handy to stop saying never, can't, won't, and not to change. She trained her how to change, to see that her father was 80, not 45, and she could tell him what to do in a gentle way. And so the caregiver relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver transformed, because the other thing was, she wasn't seeing him for who he was, and she just needed to be his daughter. She needed to love him and not be, overwhelmed by all the other problems as a result of care. So they could go back to being just a daughter and a father. That's a wonderful outcome. So how do you measure all this? Well, you do the caregiver assessment, you put a care plan together, and then you monitor. And that means going back and checking. Is Mrs. Handy getting her father, Mr. Wilson, to bed by 10 o'clock? Is that really happening? Is her child really improving in school and in daycare? You got to check about that, because things can fall apart. Has her marital life improved? Is her job still stable? And what you basically do is you get to see a whole family approach through a caregiver assessment. Because in family system, if you change one part, the whole other part changes. And sometimes bad things, like I'm going to place my dad, it changed the whole family system, because the other siblings had to come forward. They had to face they weren't, giving care and help her out, which they did. And Mrs. Handy had to change. And so the whole family system changed as a result of a caregiver assessment. So I'll see you next time. Go to my website, kathykress.com, and thank you.